Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. On today's show, we welcome Rick McElroy, who is the principal cybersecurity strategist for a little company called VMware. He's going to talk to us about burnout and its impact on the cybersecurity industry and labor and talent shortage and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of a timely topic as it seems all of us co-hosts are feeling kind of burned out today. So we're looking forward to getting pepped up and boosted and getting some good advice. All this in the context somehow of security and compliance. Should be an interesting show, so join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly.
Welcome to episode 93 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on November 2nd, 2021, the tail end of the Day of the Dead. So I'm sitting by my ofrenda because that's a big thing at my house, thanks to the movie Coco, which we watched on Halloween. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my illustrious co-hosts, Mr. Frederick Flea, just moved into a new house, so everything's peachy keen. Lee. How's it going, Flea? Joe Hannabaum. Chop or no chop, Joe?
What'd you say?
Chop or no chop?
Oh, chop. Come on.
Okay. And finally, last but not least, our own lovely Kat Valentine. How's it going today, Kat?
It's going to be a great day, yep.
Kat, you're gonna be on the doctor's couch first, I think.
Oh dear.
Hey, a few announcements before we get rolling on the show. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on Digital Pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register and get your discount today. Also, in case you missed it, in case you didn't notice, Paul's Security Weekly is now streaming on Wednesday nights from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and Enterprise Security Weekly's new streaming time is Thursday afternoons from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I was on last Wednesday. It was really weird, but we're going to keep trudging away on it, and we'll get used to it eventually. Join us and review the live stream schedule by going to securityweekly.com/live. All right, enough of that. As mentioned in the show opener, our guest today is Mr. Rick McElroy, the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist for VMware, formerly, I think, Chief Cybersecurity Strategist for Carbon Black. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Hey, thanks for having me. Very excited.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into cyber, and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, my journey into cyber starts with just a really good piece of advice that I actually listened to. So I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps when I was 17, met my beautiful wife while I was enlisted in the Marine Corps. And she said, too many deployments. And if you want to get married, you should get out of the Marine Corps. And that was a great bit of advice. And so I did. I got another bit of advice from my stepdad. And he said, boy, people are really hiring a lot of people doing networking. And then I was like, what is networking? And so I went to school. And what I figured out while I was in school is I am pretty good at building stuff, but I'm better at breaking it. And I started doing a bunch of red team work for a commercial company out here in SoCal. And then I went over to Booz Allen, grew up as a security professional, started doing that against U.S. government entities. And then subsequent to that, started building security programs. And that journey led me here to Carbon Black VMware.
And somewhere along the lines, you were at Carbon Black too, right?
Yeah. Prior to the acquisition, I've been actually with Carbon Black, now Carbon Black VMware, about 6 years.
Okay.
And so I actually was doing some virtual CISO work on the West Coast, saw a bunch of deployments and what some partners were doing with the technology, and I thought it was a real game changer. And luckily enough, the co-founders, listened to my sales pitch and let me come over and represent the company publicly. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, when I hear Carbon Black, having been in the PCI world for quite a few years, I became familiar with Carbon Black. Gosh, it's probably been over 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. As Carbon Black was being rolled out as a way to meet some of those pesky PCI requirements. So we have to have this PCI minute. It's obligatory because it's my show. But as a segue to our discussion, what are your thoughts on PCI or compliance in general, and compliance versus security? This is sort of a form of our what we call the hot seat question. But how does security versus compliance and that whole thing that we always call the security versus compliance continuum, and we can talk at length about this. How does that impact your thoughts about burnout?
That's a good question. I'll take the PCI DSS one first because I think it'll help frame some of the rest of my answers. It's interesting. I actually point to PCI DSS as one of the industry regulations that's actually had a very positive impact on cybersecurity. So if you looked at, how much credit card fraud was going on, how many credit cards were being bought and sold on the dark web, the price of those, PCI DSS attempted to restore balance to that, if you will, right? And so we can say that over the years, as PCI DSS has been out there, we've seen that number significantly drop. In fact, most of the cyber criminals don't want to really deal in stolen credit cards anymore. So I think kudos to the industry for some positive movement there. Most point of sale systems are encrypted, yada, 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 213 controls, all of those things. Now, I'll take the question of compliance versus security. I think my very early answer to that, and if you would have asked me 15, 20 years ago, I would say, boy, there's a whole lot of money being spent in compliance. They seem to be able to build teams. They seem to be able to get funding and put control frameworks out there, do assessments, all of those things, whether it was for, Sarbanes-Oxley, or any of the other industry standards that are out there, right? And so, in my humble opinion, I think early on in the journey in InfoSec, it wasn't helpful. Now, that being said, I think a lot of the professionals that were involved were also at fault, right? And so I think, over the last 10 years, compliance and security have really had to get together to ensure that they're driving towards those same outcomes. And so I think for organizations to be successful, you really want your compliance teams and your information security teams to be great partners, to sit down, do some planning around some of the controls, how they're going to do attestations. Is there a way to automate those things? All of that good stuff. And I think you can have a strategy that involves being compliant and being secure. However, you're going to have to come up with a joint strategy for that. It can't really happen in a vacuum anymore.
Fair enough. All right. So, officially turning to our topic at hand, which is burnout. I always like to start when we're having a discussion about any topic of just sort of, baselining our discussion with definitions. Conveniently, the World Health Organization actually came up with the definition of burnout and how it's like an actual medical thing. Now, team, if you could put up that slide. I don't have it memorized or anything, but I was reading up on burnout this morning in preparation for the show, and I was listening to a talk and hearing somebody quote this, and then I Googled it, and I'm like, oh, there's an actual definition. So start there, Rick, and I guess my initial question is why the interest in burnout? Why is this something that you're passionate about?
Yeah, good question. One, I've been impacted by burnout multiple times, and before I kind of knew what the definition was or the symptoms. Two, I would say, once you get amongst CISOs that are out there, directors and above, people who are running programs, sort of live in that InfoSec life 24/7, incident response teams that obviously are running real thin in the era of breaches that we're in, SOC teams that are dealing with all these alerts, and finally, I would say, part of it, I think, is what's the end goal in security? When are we done? And the answer is we're kind of never done. And so I think setting some realistic perspectives for yourself. But, when you sit down amongst these groups like I do, right, and host roundtables, or, get the privilege to go to, all of these security events and really have conversations that maybe aren't public yet. What I found out is, tons of us were going through it, right? Some of us were starting to experience actual physical and medical issues as a result of, stress and burnout in the field. And a lot of us were thinking about quitting. I frankly had that conversation with a number of folks where they're just like, when does it end? I need a better work-life balance. And so they were looking to exit the industry to get that, instead of looking, maybe for some different InfoSec roles. And I think, look, overall, we cannot continue to build programs that rely on people that we continually burn out. That's a recipe for non-resilience and frankly, for a looming disaster. And so I think if you care about the people, if you listen to the people, it's become a growing topic for a big reason, because I think it's impacting, most of the community.
Do you think our industry is unique in terms of burnout? And is it because what you were describing, our job is never done? Because, that was one of the things listed by the WHO as part of the definition, is that feeling that you're never doing enough, that you're never done. But, that's the nature of our work. Does that set us apart as an industry in terms of burnout, or are we just, one among many?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say, I bet IT professionals struggled with the same thing very, very early on, especially as, the availability of systems was in question a lot, right? I mean, it was very hard to keep things up or protect against DDoSes, or, even do load balancing in the early e-commerce days, right? So I would say, I think partly it's the cycle that we're in with information security, but certainly it's not unique to us. In fact, I think the areas that I look to get some inspiration, when you're looking at tweaks to your program or tweaks to how you deal with people, first responders and nursing are very interesting, right? And so when you look to fields that are under sustained stress conditions for long periods of time, veterans, I would include in that. I do a ton of work with PTSD and veterans as well. And so it's really around that sustained stress level and then being able to manage that, right? And put some proactive stuff in place. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily unique to us, albeit I would say we're at a unique inflection point for our career with burnout.
It's interesting that you brought up veterans and PTSD, because you mentioned you're a Marine. You are a Marine. I have a son-in-law that's a Marine that had a tour or two in Afghanistan, and recently was having a really hard times. When the war was ending, and he was struggling to get. He was struggling with the feelings of helplessness as he was in communication with his translator, who fortunately has gotten to the States. He was able to get out. But the question that popped into my head was, what is the difference? Is there a difference between burnout, as we're defining it, and PTSD? Or are they?
Yeah. I think there is a distinction, and it really has to do with the trauma event. Right. So, I come from 4 generations of vets. So I think my family has, struggled with PTSD probably all the way back to World War I, when my great grandfather served as a Marine. And different generations have dealt with it differently. I think it's an open conversation now. I think from a veteran community perspective, it was certainly a hard time. I think if you saw my social media during that time, we tried to rally a lot of people around veterans of that area. Certainly my brother is still active duty and served in Afghanistan as well. And so I do think the trauma event itself makes it unique. However, I think some parallels can be made when you really think about what happens when you're running a security program, when you feel responsible, when you take that to heart, when you want to protect an organization, and then you're victimized. a lot of times you still go through the same psychological steps that you would if you were a victim of physical trauma, right? And so I even think talking about that with our teams, creating, some events that we do in the military where, after combat, after a highly stressful event, you have a lessons learned period. You have a pause, you have a timeout. You don't continually send troops into combat. And I think with, cybersecurity professionals, we have a tendency to do that. They get off, an incident that took them, 48 hours over the weekend, 36 hours to do some system restorations. And then we expect them to be cordial and ready to roll in a meeting at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. I just think that, as leaders of those programs and culturally as an organization, we have to look at the role a little differently, and then create some programs to help our people with wellness and well-being and taking a break after these sustained events.
Okay. Any of my co-hosts have questions? I don't want to bogart the mic here.
Yeah, I'm really curious. When we talk about burnout, at least when I think about just conceptually, this idea of burning, right? That generally means, okay, something is just done. And I was actually kind of curious if you could maybe go into what are the after effects of burnout? Is it recoverable? And what are some of the things that people can think about for recovering from burnout?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'll talk about a couple of my cases, right? So I was part of an organization. I greenfield built a cybersecurity program. I think I was there 6 or 7 years, heavily invested in the people. This is the point in my career where I'd really taken that culture and people side super seriously, invested a lot of time from a leadership perspective, and things were, I think I would put them like it was great. Like our work environment was awesome. We had a lot of fun, and then business downturns. So things we can't control. Now we're going through massive layoff periods. Each quarter we're nominating employees to not be on the island anymore. You're in some really weird political conversations, and I just found myself, as a leader, unprepared for that. I was prepared to, sometimes get my budget pulled, but certainly, when you're this heavily invested in people and you see the impact to, their families, to their careers, all of those things. I was just done, right? The stress level was so high. I'd get super emotional going into the office, probably cried a couple of times. And so for myself, I actually had to take a break after that job before, I started my next one, and really, I think just spend some time like getting back to where I could be passionate again, where I wasn't cynical, because I have a tendency to do that anyway, is to lean a little towards the pessimistic side of InfoSec and cyber. And so I do think, like lessons that I took out of that, I was definitely not getting enough physical activity. I think if you do any research, and I'm not an expert certainly, but if you do any research into stress hormones and cortisol, one of the best ways to manage them is to get them out through exercise. So that was something I wasn't doing. I was definitely eating unhealthily. My caffeine consumption was probably 10x what it is today. Wasn't taking regular vacations, really wrapped up in this gig, right? In fact, even after I left, I maintained relationships with folks that were still there and was still kind of in that job, right? Commiserating with people and doing that whole thing. And so I think, finding your own true north, which for me is my family, and I use humor as a tool a lot, and getting back to having fun. So I do think unplugging absolutely helped. I think generally speaking, getting away from cyber for a period of time. During my current role, I have a tendency to do that in between, normally in between my flights that I take. I'll take some downtime and make sure that I'm unplugging from cyber, and it's not become my whole life. But yeah, those were just things that like I experienced and went through, and it was tough. It was a couple of months of, do I even want to go back and build the program again? And I love building programs. I love the people involved. I love, the technology involved, but it had just gotten to the point where, simply put, I was angry personally, and I don't like it. I'm usually smiling. So I think we all know what our center is, and doing those things to make sure we don't drift too far away.
You mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, especially within our industry, with this idea of unplugging from cyber. And the reason why I mentioned this in particular for our industry is a lot of people in cybersecurity, that literally is their identity. And I was actually kind of curious, like how should people actually navigate that where, like for us, like, oh, we have all these community events, a lot of people, your friends also work in the same industry. I'm actually kind of curious, like, are there things that we should be doing just personally with, wrestling with this idea of like, hey, cyber is my identity, dealing with that with burnout. And then maybe related to that, you also mentioned, still being in touch with your friends. And I'm actually kind of curious, are there things that we could be doing as peers to help support each other to either recognize that one of our friends is burning out or helping support them during their burnout?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number one thing I would say is show up with empathy, right? So we can't always solve the issue that people are going through, right? But I think we can show up with empathy. We can try to provide some resources. Personally, for me, and I've been doing a lot of work with them over the last month for cybersecurity awareness, Mental Health Hackers. I think it's a great organization that's really attempting to get out there in the community, have these conversations, promote things like mental health first aid, which is a course I'm actually starting next week, which gives us, I think, some better skills and some tools that we can use when someone is really going through a tactical issue. And if you wouldn't mind, can you ask the first part of that question again?
Yeah, it was just, trying to figure out, like, especially in our industry, like I said, you mentioned
unplugging,
unplugging from cyber, whereas in our industry, a lot of people, this literally is their life. It actually is their life. All their friends are cybersecurity professionals.
Yeah.
All of their hobbies involve cybersecurity. All the traveling they do is to go to a cybersecurity event, et cetera.
Yeah, that was me for a long time. And, I've done a few podcasts on this specifically, but, it's interesting. So I started my career in 1998. So as you can imagine, if you're at a barbecue, out in beautiful Southern California, and someone asks what you do, and you said at the time, I do information assurance, everyone looked at you and was like, I don't know what that is. And then you said data security, and people were like, I don't know what that is. And then you said, I'm a professional hacker. And I break into companies and teach them how not to have that happen. And then it was really interesting for people. It gave you this kind of cool persona. You had skills that other people didn't have, right? So you can see from the perspective of being unique and interesting. It's a unique and interesting field, and I've met tons of unique and interesting people. And I think certainly early in the career field, what you're trying to do is amass this wealth of wisdom and knowledge and experience as fast as possible, or at least I did, right? So I went heads down. I'll do any project. I'll raise my hand. I'll drive 6 hours to go do an implementation and then drive home that night, whatever it was. I was doing it because I wanted to be competent and seen as competent amongst my peer groups. And unfortunately, the impact of that was my whole life became cyber. I didn't have any other hobbies. My hobbies was, playing around with Python or the latest tool that's out there. Going to conferences, right? Not having friends. To your point, not having friends that do other things. Suddenly, you find 90% of the people that you hang out with are in cyber, and it's 100% of the conversations that you have all the time. And so I do think on that particular note, it is important to take tech breaks and actually get away from your phones. I go to the middle of the desert or out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean to do fishing. They have no cell towers. It's kind of perfect. And then secondarily, I would say find some other hobbies and interests that are not cyber related. I play a lot of poker. It really helps occupy my mind while I'm playing. I don't have a mental capacity to think of other things while I'm trying to run the math and not lose all my money. So I just find those two things are super helpful. And then having friends where the conversations, maybe every once in a while they ask you a cyber question, but that's not their investment in you as a human being is what you do, right? So I value the people that I have around me that aren't in cyber that keep me on, things that are fun and away from it.
No, I love your recommendations. It's funny just because I know so many other security people that also kind of flee to the wilderness, et cetera. Like in my case, I love going snowboarding. I love also going camping out in the desert, et cetera. I was actually kind of curious because you're kind of alluding towards this effectively coping mechanisms. And I was wondering if maybe you can elaborate on like healthy coping mechanisms, some unhealthy coping mechanisms, and how people should be navigating those.
Yeah, definitely. Look, and I often cite this, and I'm going to continue to credit him. My journey, I think, actually being open about all this stuff started at a DerbyCon when I saw Chris Nickerson do this really wonderful talk on, and I want to say the title was, "So You Want to Be an InfoSec Rock Star?" I mean, and we're talking about, Chris Nickerson. He leads all the red team things, right? And he's a good friend of mine, but he really sat down and talked about the impact, right? And unhealthy coping mechanisms like drinking and staying up till 4 every morning at various events, and people rewarding you for that behavior, right? I remember one of the things that he said was, he was like, you're participating in a lot of unhealthy behavior, and everyone is telling you you're awesome because you're doing that, right? And granted, things have changed. It's certainly a different year and a different era than it was, I think, in early InfoSec. But a lot of us fell into those traps. I mean, think about the number of happy hour events we do as information security professionals. The answer is a lot, and almost every time. I've been happy over the pandemic to see, pivoting away from drinking events towards, coffee events or painting events or just other things, because that's pretty unhealthy. And I think, if you've been around enough people with trauma and stress, you can see people creep towards drinking. I know I've certainly probably drank too much. I don't think I ever had, a massive issue with it, but I think some of my friends would be like, yeah, you probably did that. So I think healthy ones, look, I bought a rowing machine this year, just again, because gyms were closed, and, so getting outside in nature is a big one for me. I think exercise is a huge one. Humor. I love good comedy and escapism and movies. Yeah, so that's sort of what I do. But yeah, there's a lot of unhealthy ones out there, like burying yourself back into work, drinking certainly, and then of course there's a lot of PEDs that are used in the industry as well, whether those are Adderall and Ritalin or a bunch of other stuff, right? So you got to be mindful of that too. I think have a healthy, long career.
Yeah, but the entire scene is full of that kind of stuff, to be honest. And, I don't think that it's just job role. So for example, in compliance right now, it's Q4. So that's, it's just like, pen testers and stuff like that. Everybody wants to get their audit done. So there's a lot of burnout usually by Q4. You're just exhausted. And so that's like more on the job level, right? And then you were, Flea, you were talking about, hey, there's people that this is their entire lives. And I think that I kind of look like that, although I do have outside hobbies, like very nature-centric outside hobbies. So I've already learned that lesson. But I've been doing, phone phreaking or hacking since I was 6. So, I mean, kind of hard to separate that from your identity, but this is not all I do. I think, though, there's a third thing where I'll speak for myself and a lot of ladies that I know in my in some Signal groups where we talk about this, and there's a lot of sexism and racism that is just rampant since the 90s in the industry, and I've been in the industry since 98 as well, and it used to be super, super bad. And it's 2021 now. And I have to say for myself, I'm actually in this weird headspace right now where I'm like, F it. I'm cashing in all of my IPO. I'm going to buy a horse ranch in the middle of nowhere and raise alpaca and horses because it's still so rampant. And over this 20 plus years, it just hasn't seemed to get better. And so I feel like there is for people of color and for women, there might be also this other layer. And I think we would be remiss to ignore it, right? And I'll give you an example of, no, it's still going on really hardcore, now, present day. So there was BurbSecCon. It's an after con, I think, for TorCon out in Chicago. They had a
ThoughtCon.
pretty they had a pretty offensive badge contest or whatever, where it was just like, make a badge or whatever. And some idiots decided to make a pantsless Barbie that squirted out hand sanitizer, which was just super, super stupid. And just, but it to me, in this industry, it sends the message of, yo, you're not welcome. Even though you've contributed for the last 20 years, just like we have, you're not welcome here. And you need to just get out. And I'm at that point personally. I'm in a weird headspace to where that got me a person that was a year and a half sober drinking again. That really threw me. And so I think that we would be remiss to not talk about and acknowledge that that is a level as well. It's not just jobs. It's not just your very specific industry in InfoSec. And it's not just, I'm like getting a little upset just talking about it. It's not just those things. There's also that too. And it might not happen for everybody, but it happens for a number of us, a good size of us. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and at first I wanted to, acknowledge those statements and certainly say that, yeah, I agree with that. I thought, personally speaking, as I think a man in the industry that is trying to change those things, it's hugely disappointing and angering, and completely understandable. I think your point of view on that, and while I would say sometimes it seems like we've made progress, something like this happens, and certainly is not only offensive, I think for the community and tribe that some of us are trying to build.
Yeah.
But it's also, to your point, it adds this other layer. And maybe I've experienced some things like, people, being bullies, or especially in early cybersecurity, or, those things. I don't think I can certainly say I know what it's like to be a minority or, a woman in the industry. I can say that I'm hopeful. I can say I think there's a lot of us that are rowing in that right direction. But to address that, I can't imagine on top of the stress that already exists in a normal job, to even have to navigate or even spend any. We shouldn't have to do it in 2021, right? And I think that's the thing that annoys me the most, especially as someone who, like, I heavily recruit, any group of people I can. Into InfoSec, but then to hear these stories where it's like, well, we did the training, we got in, and then you run into something like this. Certainly I can say I that's an understandable feeling, and I might feel the same way. And again, I can't apologize on behalf of those idiots, but I can say there's a lot of us that are working to change that, and it's a shame. Frankly speaking, it's a shame that our industry hasn't responded.
Yeah, and I just want to say one more thing about that before we go to break is, I think the most devastating thing about that, because a new stupid sexist thing happens at minimum once every 2 weeks, is what I've noticed over the last 4 years. It's been getting a little bit progressively worse. What made this one stand out is that there were over 100 attendees there, men and women, who said nothing in real life. And so maybe you have, a neurodiversity kind of thing where, it's a big peer pressure kind of thing, and you don't want to say anything in person. But then there was a video posted of this offensive badge on Twitter, and 3,500 people over 3 days saw that thing and 8 people said something about it, like a little comment here. Everyone else said nothing. And me and like a group of 20 women were sitting in Signal over 2 of those 3 days, sitting there going, is someone even going to say anything? And so when you have something like that is the level of burnout that I personally am dealing with. And I know a lot of other people are dealing with too. That's where I'm at with it. So anyway, Jeff, I'll let you take over and all that.
It's getting heavy here, and I appreciate everybody's contribution.
Well, it should. Look, Jeff, to again put a, I guess at least my period on that statement. It should. It's outrageous and unacceptable. And frankly speaking, if you're a male inside of the industry, start acting like a big brother, start acting like a partner, and stop acting like a 13-year-old. Because frankly, it really hurts any progress we're attempting to make in the industry when a group of folks does that, right? And look, I know we're a diverse group of people inside of InfoSec. We certainly have a lot of backgrounds, but again, this isn't, it's not the 80s anymore. We gotta stop that.
No, that's fair. And to put it even more succinctly, you have to be deliberate about doing something. You and I are as stereotypically, middle-class white male as it gets. We've had all the breaks all of our life, and
I'll disagree with that from a poor white trash family. But yeah, certainly, I think in my career, I'll accept that as a definitive statement.
Well, you look like a middle-class white male, but maybe that's part of the problem.
I have fed face. I know.
You do. You need a ponytail or something. Anyway, let's take a quick break. It's not really easy to take a break right now because we're in the thick of things, but we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back.